Trump's own attorney general and vice president knew that he lost the election, but he still tried to steal the election by pressuring state officials, designing fake elector plans, nearly having Mike Pence hanged, and ultimately demanding that his supporters, quote, fight like hell.
Why would lawmakers try to keep a key prosecutor out of public view? In this fiery exchange, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett accuses Republicans of trying to hide Jack Smith from cameras, not because of weakness, but because of what he might say under oath. What follows is a rapid-fire confrontation over criminal accountability, presidential power, and the evidence behind January 6th. This isn't just a legal debate, it's a direct challenge to attempts to rewrite history, and a warning about what happens when facts collide with political survival.
It's curious because you've sat here all day, and thank you so much for showing up, because this was something that you wanted to do. The Republicans wanted to make sure that you were hid in a room with no cameras, because I was there. They didn't really want you out public because they were afraid of what you would say, which is that you could have proven your case because you are a career prosecutor who knows how to prosecute criminals. So just to be clear, today it seems like the Republicans have not really fought very much about whether or not Trump was guilty or not. In fact, their fight seems to be over whether or not you were authorized to prove their guilt. Do you recall a number of Republican members asking about whether or not your appointment was okay, even though we know that you've testified about the more than 100-year precedent that allowed for your appointment?
I was asked questions about that today, and our position as we filed in our appeal is that there was strong support for my appointment, including Supreme Court precedent directly on point.
Thank you so much. Additionally, everybody's been all gingerly here today, but I don't know why we're acting surprised that a man who had close to 90 allegations out of 4 different jurisdictions and ultimately ended up with 34 convictions after a jury was able to hear all the evidence would possibly be committing a criminal act on January 6th. In fact, considering the fact that we are now under the impression that he is violating people's due process rights, he is ignoring court orders, he's starting wars without congressional authority in contradiction to the Constitution. He's enriching himself to the tune of over $1.4 billion. He's shaking down electors to draw maps that will help him stay in power because the Republicans don't understand that they swore an oath to the Constitution and that we are supposed to do checks and balances. He's also shaking down TV stations to get money. So why are we trying to pretend as if it is out of the realm for this particular man to commit the crime that he committed on January 6th? And frankly, the only reason he ran for president was to make sure that he would not be prosecuted, because I fully believe that you would have put him under the jail based on our long form conversation that we had. But according to your special counsel report on page 137, it states the department's view that the Constitution prohibits the continued indictment and prosecution of a president is categorical and does not turn on the gravity of the crimes charged, the strength of the government's proof, or the merits of the prosecution. And that, quote, but for Mr. Trump's election and imminent return to the presidency, the office assessed that the admissible evidence was sufficient to obtain and sustain a conviction at trial. In other words, Donald Trump ran for president, like I said, so he wouldn't have to spend the rest of his life in prison. The chairman and other members of this committee have spent all day attacking you and trying to rewrite the history of January 6th. But Mr. Jim Jordan, the chairman, failed to mention how he was running around the Capitol terrified by the possibility that all those insurrectionists would harm him. In fact, on page 97 of the deposition transcript, you mentioned how Mark Meadows, the president's chief of staff, quote unquote, never saw Jim Jordan so scared. The chairman also failed to mention that he was in direct contact with the White House in the days leading up to and on January 6th, which is why his toll records were subpoenaed by your office. Let me be clear, because they're trying to act like this is Democrats on Republicans, and I guess you are a covert Democrat that knew that he was going to try to steal an election before he tried to steal that election, and so therefore you were somehow put into place. I mean, the conspiracy theories make your head spin, but nevertheless, were you going to subpoena the toll records of every single Republican simply because they were a Republican?
No, we subpoenaed the toll records in the course of this investigation because they were relevant to our investigation.
Relevant. Oh, okay. All right. So that means something about facts. So let's talk about facts. Donald Trump lost to Joe Biden, yes or no?
That's correct.
Okay. In fact, 60 federal and state courts have found that there was no evidence of election fraud. Trump's own attorney general and vice president knew that he lost the election, but he still tried to steal the election by pressuring state officials, designing fake elector plans, nearly having Mike Pence hanged, and ultimately demanding that his supporters, quote, fight like hell, correct?
Correct.
We all saw it happen we all saw what happened once they reached the U.S. Capitol. As your report outlines, President Trump knew that he would incite violence at the Capitol that day. In fact, some of Trump's senior advisors were pushing for violence. For example, page 81 of the report details how co-conspirators number 2, John Eastman, tried to convince Mike Pence to break the law, stating that, quote, violence was necessary. So it isn't just Trump who is responsible for the death of multiple law enforcement officers and the injuries of thousands of people. A lot of Republican members of Congress are also responsible. 147 Republicans voted to overturn the 2020 election results, including multiple members currently serving on this committee, and I will yield.
This exchange is defined by its intensity, its specificity, and its refusal to treat January 6th as an abstract political argument. Congresswoman Crockett does not focus on procedural technicalities or political theater. Instead, she anchors her questioning in documented findings, sworn testimony, and the conclusions laid out in the Special Counsel's report. The message is clear. The central issue is not whether Donald Trump can be investigated, but whether overwhelming evidence is being deliberately ignored for political convenience. Crockett frames the day's hearing as an effort to undermine the prosecutor rather than confront the substance of the case. Her argument is that much of the opposition is no longer centered on innocence or guilt, but on whether the prosecutor himself had the authority to act. By shifting attention back to long-standing legal precedent supporting the appointment of special counsel, she exposes what she presents as a strategic diversion, a way to avoid grappling with the facts by attacking the process instead. The exchange also widens beyond January 6th to address a broader pattern of conduct. Crockett points to multiple criminal cases, court rulings, and convictions to argue that the events of January 6th did not occur in isolation. Instead, she presents them as part of a longer trajectory of legal exposure, disregard for court authority, and pressure on democratic institutions. Her framing suggests that the attempt to overturn the election was not an anomaly, but a continuation of behavior that had already drawn serious legal scrutiny across multiple jurisdictions. One of the most consequential moments comes from the citation of the Special Counsel report itself. By referencing the department's position on prosecuting a sitting president, Crockett underscores a stark reality. The limitation is constitutional, not evidentiary. In other words, the barrier is not a lack of proof, but the legal rule that prevents prosecution while a president is in office. This distinction is critical because it reframes the narrative from one of insufficient evidence to one of delayed accountability. The exchange further challenges efforts to minimize or rewrite the fear and chaos of January 6th. Crockett highlights testimony regarding senior officials' panic, internal communications, and the seriousness with which the threat was perceived at the time. By doing so, she confronts what she portrays as selective memory, where the same individuals who once feared for their safety now downplay the severity of the attack for political reasons. Her questioning on toll records and subpoenas also reinforces a core principle of investigations: relevance. Crockett emphasizes that subpoenas are not issued based on party affiliation, but based on factual connections to an investigation. This directly rebuts claims of partisan targeting and reframes the process as evidence-driven rather than politically motivated. At its core, this exchange is about accountability versus narrative control. Crockett's approach leaves little room for ambiguity. She asserts that multiple courts rejected fraud claims, that senior officials knew the election was lost, and that pressure campaigns, fake elector schemes, and public rhetoric contributed to a breakdown that culminated in violence. By laying out these elements in sequence, she presents January 6th not as a spontaneous event, but as the predictable outcome of sustained efforts to overturn lawful results. The broader implication is deeply institutional. When elected officials challenge investigations by attacking prosecutors rather than addressing evidence, public confidence in democratic systems erodes. Crockett's argument is that this erosion is not accidental. It is politically useful. If facts can be dismissed as partisan, then accountability itself can be reframed as persecution. This moment stands as a reminder that the strength of a democracy depends on more than elections alone. It depends on whether leaders accept lawful outcomes, respect judicial authority, and allow evidence to be evaluated without intimidation or distortion. The exchange forces viewers to confront an uncomfortable truth. When accountability is treated as a threat, the rule of law becomes negotiable, and that is when institutions begin to weaken from the inside.